We go. We were just talking about when we first met, and it is a time when, especially when we're trying all these new technologies, such as the kind of questions we've been thinking about vis-a-vis Instagram, to remember the fact that we have had a conversation going back, as you said, 29 years.
Yeah.
I have known of you before that, and of course, I have known you for this period of time. We have spoken in person, we have spoken in conferences together, and of course, you and I have had a fairly, shall I say, animated email exchange on various things to do with the cinema, which we hope to be able to continue and to make public. Nevertheless, Ashish, a film retrospective is, of course, a very, very privileged moment. It is a special occasion in the life of a filmmaker, and more than a filmmaker, it's actually a special occasion in the life of those who watch that filmmaker. And while I've seen your films over the years, watching 11 films, that is the list that you sent me, which is, I imagine, the list that is on MUBI, was a special occasion. Because I saw them together, I saw them almost as though they were a film by, there is something that happens in which you actually start seeing them as though they were all made, as it were, almost at the same time. And what has happened is that your book, which you have been working on for some 20-something years, has come out this year as well. So it's a major moment in your life and career, I should say. So many congratulations to you for this. I also want to, of course, I really do want to sort of mention Mort and Tara, who brought our own conversation into a whole new era, and of course to MUBI for making this happen. Of the 11 films which I saw, what was actually really interesting, and remembering the fact that you are an archaeologist, you actually see a cinematic vocabulary being put together brick by brick, piece by piece. There is something about your films all the way from etc. through to Kalki Matan Katha, where you are seeing the founding of a cinematic vocabulary that's coming into place. This is, I made a list, something like 4 of these films are on 16 mil, 3 are on 35 mil, Vakatunda Swaha, Nirakar Chaya, and Katho Upanishad. 2 are on digital video and 2 available in DCP formats. But you're getting across this body of work and across all of this, all the kinds of symbols and references that one associates with you. The myriad cults of Kali worship, which appear for the first time in this list, in Kali Ghat Fetish, in the Bohurupi character of the young man, and appears again and again in Performing Death. There is the colonial cemetery, which is something that appears on more than one occasion. Again, person, etc. Then in Performing Death. There is the figure of the gas mask, which, of course, most famously in Vakratunda Swaha, but I also realized that it appears in the Othello film earlier. And then there is a larger struggle of the production, I think, of the female protagonist, which curiously associates with the Beckett figures, so Antral, for example, but also Nirakar Chaya, which is where those figures are being formed. Curious way, while I was looking at this body of work belonging to a person, a filmmaker, and my old friend Ashish Avikunthak, it was as though I was looking at 2 people. There was on the one hand the filmmaker, and then there was on the other hand the archaeologist, right? It is difficult actually to think of, for example, somebody who wrote this particular book being the same person who did Kalki Matan Katha. And what I wanted to ask you to start with was, how did these figures come together? How did these 2 really fairly autonomous entities come together? Or were they in your mind always the same person?
No, they were not. I think this is an important biographical question. I used to watch a lot of films when I was in Bombay doing my undergraduate work. And so at Screen Unit, it was at Screen Unit, which Amrit Gangar was running. So around 94, when I was finishing my BA degree, I was having a conversation with Amrit, and Amrit said that you should go to film school. So obviously the only film school in that time was FTI, so I decided to check out what's this thing, status there, and it was a dead year. So it was one of those years after the strike, the work that you're doing now about FTI strikes. So it was one of those years after the strikes, and there was no admission in 1994. And so then I decided, okay, let me go to, so he said something which really, Amrit said something which really was important. He said, go to Pune, at least you can be in Pune and you can go to FTI and watch films every day. You can go to National Film Archive and watch films every day. And I took that very seriously. I said, yeah, that's a great idea. So I ended up in Pune, and now archaeology was an accident, complete accident. I was thinking of doing an MA in anthropology, but the head of the department of the Pune Anthropology Department, Pune University Anthropology Department, told me that the department is not very exciting. And he advised me that I should do archaeology. During those years, I could not even spell archaeology properly. And incidentally, so I went to the Department of Archaeology, which was then at Deccan College, which was just becoming a separate institution in itself. It was the earlier part of Pune University. And there I applied, and luckily I got into the school. And I actually, the only reason I decided to go to the archaeology department is that was the easiest program to get admission into. And once I started the archaeology MA, it was initially difficult because I'm not trained as a historian. I did not have a BA degree in history. I had a BA degree in social work, which is far removed from archaeology. But over the matter of few weeks, because at that time there were some really stunning archaeologists, theorists who were teaching at Deccan College. I can name a few, somebody like K. Padya, who's like one of the foremost paleoarchaeologists in India, who was teaching theoretical archaeology, and there were a few others. So in matter of few weeks, I got really into the program, and I decided that I don't want to go to FTI. I want to finish my MA in archaeology. But at the same time, almost every day I would bicycle down to FTII from Yerbada, where Deccan College was, to Prabhat Road, which is nearly about 11-kilometer bicycling ride. So about 22 kilometers every day I would bike just to watch a film every evening at the main theater in FTI National Film Archive. And so what happens in 1994 is that I actually start a dual career. One, very much want to make films. The other, becoming an archaeologist. The archaeology degree at Deccan College is a very rigorous training in archaeology of South Asia. And so those 2 years was really a defining moment of my life. And those two parallel tracks kept on going. So after I finished my MA, I came back to Bombay. I did all sorts of work, basically try to collect money, save money so that I could make, finish, etc., and then make Kalighat fetish. And at the same time, I spent some time working in the Varli areas in Dhanu Taluka, collecting oral tradition of Varli Adivasis. And then in 1999, I ended up in the US, and there I then applied to the Stanford archaeology program. Again, an accident. It was completely accident that I got into the program. And so in the sense that both the tracks have been, now it's like 2022, nearly about 28 years of constantly thinking both cinematically and archaeologically. That has been my life, more or less. And what you see in my cinema works, some of those archaeological preoccupation, historical preoccupation kind of seeping in, although mostly unconsciously rather than doing it consciously. Yeah.
This is interesting in multiple ways. I was just remembering a key figure in Amrit Gangar's life, and you mentioned him, and I should of course remember that he was my first publisher. So here the cheer to Amrit Gangar. I hope Amrit you're with us today, and the figure of D.D. Kosambi. Kosambi is, of course, he lived somewhere near the Film Institute, and he had a whole thing about, as you know, Kumar Shahani will talk about it, about basically saying, if you want to know the history of Indian civilization, I'll just take you for a walk.
Yes.
And I will show you up and down the road whatever happened in the 6th century, that particular connection. And in fact, in Rummaging for Pasts, which is one of our early films in the series, what you do is really interesting. On the one hand, you are an archaeologist in Sicily, And in fact, one of your fellow archaeologists, I think a young British woman, is talking about a very boring life where there is no, there's no fun going on. And on the other hand, you have found footage which you have found in, I think, Chor Bazaar or someplace, which is actually about shadi and weddings and all that is going on around you. And you juxtapose the two effectively to suggest that you can do an archaeological dig in Chor Bazaar of the kind of weddings and things that you see around you, and find in them something resembling a Sicilian dig. Now, this is a radical proposition. I mean, it associates with celluloid, and that is something we will be talking about also. The kind of shift that takes place in the way that celluloid is at some point of time no longer a medium of communication, but actually is material like sculpture, sculpting in time, the famous line. And of course, there'll be more to be said about time as we go along. You use obsolete or at least post-sell-by date footage which is available to you. You sometimes said that you buy it for cheap online and in other places. You have used cameras that are especially I think 16mm cameras. And there is a kind of a radical proposition here of how that found footage and the Sicilian archaeology can come together, which does seem to suggest that bringing these two elements together was something of a project for you. And I think I can see that happen all the way through, I think, Katha Upanishad will have some of it. Kalki Manthan Katha definitely has a great deal of it. So I'd like you to say something more then, more about how these came together as a practice for a filmmaker, how you went and did digging, if I have you right, similar to Sicily, in Chor Bazaar.
That was something, once I got into the Stanford program, so there it was through an invitation. So at that year, this is the year, summer of 2000, Stanford University was excavating in about 5 sites. They were excavating in Swiss Alps, they were excavating in Peru, there was an excavation in Turkey, and there was this excavation in Sicily. Four sites. I think there was one more. There was one in Rome. And so, as a graduate student, we were asked that you should go and experience certain digs, because as a graduate student of archaeology at Deccan College, I had excavated as part of the degree program, excavated at a Chalcolithic site. That is where we were given field training. It's an important Chalcolithic site called Balathal in Rajasthan. And so I had a training as a field archaeologist, so I got a chance to. So that summer, I actually went to Sicily and to Peru. So it was quite a remarkable experience of my life, and one summer doing 2 separate continent-based archaeological work. And in both the places, I also had my camera, and the idea was to make a video diary at both the places. So the diary at Peru, I did not find exciting, so that really did not turn out to be a film. But the Sicily diary was really exciting for one reason. One very interesting reason is that I was the only person of color in a dig which was full of American and European and Italian, Swedish, Norwegian archaeologists. And this is where the interesting thing is that I was also the only person with a digital movie camera. So I had the power of, in a little sense, I had the power of the camera with me. And so what I did is, that's what you see in the film was basically a diary, talking to people, looking at how excavation is happening. And once I came back, I thought, okay, let me start editing. And I found that diary to be very inane. I just did not like the form it was emerging. That's when I decided that, okay, I want to work with another kind of archaeology, which I was doing, which is what you would call media archaeology, of collecting home movies, basically 8mm, Super 8, and 16mm films, discarded very specifically in the Bombay Chor Bazaar, which is also now being completely changed. So because I used to live in Bombay, very close to the Chor Bazaar near Girgaon, so I used to go to Chor Bazaar very often, just kind of as a flâner. And then I would find these films, During those years, I did not have money. It was only in the mid-90s I had a little bit of money, so I started buying. And what is very interesting about that footage is that I hadn't digitized it till I reached Stanford. It was only after I shot this film at this diary at Sicily, I started editing, that I decided, okay, I would like to make a film which would also use this found footage. And I hadn't seen them because India did not have, I mean, at least there wasn't any location in India which could digitize 8 mm footage to digital. So it was, I then decided, I went to got some money from the university, went to San Francisco and then digitized it. It was about 3 hours of footage that I got. And that I interspersed in the film. Basically to create, I think in my head, it is a dialogue between two, it's a dialogue of a single practice, which is digging into past, but two separate kind of materiality. One is physical materiality of an archaeological site. Another is actually a celluloid / digital materiality. And what I did, it took me about, I think I must have edited the film, and after I digitized it, it took me about 2 weeks to edit. It was quite a very quick edit to play around with this kind of a conversation between two forms of past. Subsequently, what has happened after that, and you can see a little sense, you can see a little bit in Kalighat fetish, for instance, and then subsequently in much more seriously in Rati Chakravyu, in Kathopanishad, in Kalki Manthan Katha, that I'm constantly, I think, I'm invoking, and this is kind of going back to D.D. Kosambi, because Kosambi also used to lecture at Deccan College when he was in Pune. He's considered to be a very important post-colonial Indologist, although he was not an archaeologist, and he was very close to D.D. Sankhalia, who started Deccan College Archaeology Department. And so the idea was that, and exactly what you said about what Kumar talks, Kumar talks about D.D. Kosambi, about how the way to understand India is through materiality and archaeological form, which is something that I have done throughout my film. So like invoking different kinds of pasts, not just a past which is based on Kali, but also Vedantic, then in Puranic, Kalki Manthan Katha has a very strong Puranic element, the Mahabharata in a certain sense, or a certain kind of a Puranic war in a certain sense is a subtext, where you're waiting for one of the foremost Vaishnav, what should I say, God in absent, Kalki. Yeah, and so this has been a conscious process, which is also what you will see, what you have seen in my later film, Apatkalin Trikalika, and the subsequent film. It's for me, it's a constant dialogue between the past and the present, through cinematic work.
Yeah. But then you find Kalki, I mean, you find all those Vishnu's avatars, then you find them in Trotsky, Ceausescu, and in Mao. So that's a very contemporary, and there's this other film that you make in which you have juxtaposed this. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually part of a project you do for a archaeology conference, where you juxtapose those shots of the cemetery with the Kali, the performance that happened. And there you have a certain kind of cinematography. By the way, also I don't know if these folks are around, but my hats off to two very famous names that are there, the Ranjan Palit, and then there is Setu, and you have worked with cinematographers of that stature, even as you have done this kind of experimental work. I just want to move to another thing, which is, we're talking, I don't know, before we went live or after, about something that is obviously unmistakable about you, which is your self-production, your dress, and even from what we can see here. You once said to me, I think in a conversation about Ashutosh Mukherjee, the educator, the jurist, and I think the second Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, having a kind of a strange resemblance to how you are. And so I was surprised, but then not so surprised, to open page 2 of your book and have you describe yourself, I quote, "I belong to a refugee family." Okay, there's nothing about Ashutosh Mukherjee suggesting refugeehood, right? Both my parents, you say, families were forced to abandon their homeland during the partition of India in 1947. My father's family moved from the Afghanistan-Pakistan border town of Hoti Mardan in the northwestern frontier province, now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, to towns in western Uttar Pradesh. My mother's family escaped from Lahore on the eve of partition in one of those blood-laced trains that have been immortalized in innumerable narratives of partition. They reached Delhi and lived in refugee settlements. This is important. Stories of death, terror, and trauma that were part of my imaginative universe unexpectedly became part of my daily reality. And you said the genesis of the book begins during those days, and I suspect the genesis of several films also begins there. So, where is Ashutosh Mukherjee in all this?
No, no, I think.
And how does the Bengali aspect come in?
No, I think for me, the Ashutosh Mukherjee was just, often when I walk on the streets of Calcutta, because of my moustache, people would kind of, oh, the Ashutosh Mukherjee is going. And then suppose when I go in university conferences where the audiences of or the people are a different intellectual bent, they would look at my moustache and talk about, oh, this is a Nietzsche moustache. And I remember going to film festivals where people are neither so familiar with Nietzsche or with Ashutosh Mukherjee. They then call me, oh, that's a Groucho Marx, you know. So I think what I was trying to, when I was trying to do is that often I read people reading me. So that's the Ashutosh Mukherjee reference. Now the Bengali thing happened is that after partition, as you said, as you read, both my parents were in North India, and then in 1969 my father moved to Calcutta. And so my father, and then subsequently after he got married to my mother moved to Calcutta in 71. And so they have been here since the past 52 years, 53 years now, in Calcutta. That's where I was born and raised. Therefore, I think of, as the reason I kind of invoke my refugee genealogy is that I'm always been in like, even before I was born, we have been in a certain kind of emotion. And today I kind of live a dual life between Calcutta and the US. And so it's just, and what happens with this book is it starts on 6th of December 1992, which is the destruction of Babri Masjid. And that was I was not thinking of being an archaeologist then. I mean, as I said, it was an accident. But what was very important about that moment, like a lot of us, is that it questioned, challenged our imagination of India. And especially, I remember speaking to my parents soon after, because I was in the middle of the riots, soon after, rioting started in Bombay pretty ferociously from the night of 7th of December, continued till about, I think, 15th of December. And I remember talking to my parents and telling them, look, everything is okay. But I also remember telling in one of the conversations, telling my father, कि आपने इतनी जो कहानियां बताई थी, अब हमारे साथ हो रहा है यहाँ पर. And that's a moment, because that's a moment. I come from a family who, although they have seen, or at least they have lived through a certain sense of partition and refugee, but never ever harbored any Islamophobic thoughts. They were very deeply religious, but secular in all senses. So 92 for a lot of us, I mean, and for me, because was a distraughting event. And the very fact, and for me specifically, because I was there in Bombay, I saw violence very, very closely, because during those years I was doing my undergraduate degree in social work. And the College of Social Work, Nirmala Niketan, where I was an undergraduate student, we became a nodal agency to do relief activities, both after the December 92 riots and the January 93 riots. So from December, January till about July of 93 and even later, I was very closely involved as a student in refugee camps in Bombay doing relief work. So that had a very powerful impact on me. I was just about 20 years old then. And so for me, that book, the book that you talk about, and my films are a way of kind of challenging in the question, in the case of the book, how past is manufactured by the state, transformed by the state. So the book is fundamentally about the distortion of past by a statist enterprise, whereas my cinema is, I think, is a way of creating an alternative discourse of religiosity, a more nuanced, a more complex, a more philosophically indebted to Hindu religiosity, in order to construct a parallel narrative to what the Hindutva narrative, which has now become hegemonic. And that's why, and this was something, I would say that around, by the time I reached Pune in '94, that's when it slowly started emerging, this kind of a, which is what you see. I think you're very right, like in 2021, both the MUBI retrospective, which is nearly 25 years of my work, and the book come out, which is nearly about 22 years of my work, in a sense, is actually a very important moment in my life. Both these
so there are two quotations here. One is a classic line. It says, "Everything is always in the middle." The other one is, "In the beginning was dead air. We gave life to it. We float in dead air so that it can live, not we." So you're actually sort of breathing and floating in dead air to let the air breathe.
Yep.
Not, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's a, I can just tell you, interject. That's a biographical reference to my own asthma.
Okay.
Asthmatics, my teenage. So it's like, yeah.
This is for those who, the uninitiated, a quotation of Rati Chakravyuh, one of those lines. But there is another line which I think is really even more interesting, which is Nachiketa asking Yama about death. He wants Yama to explain to him about death, which led me to, there's the one aspect about duration and cinematic time and all of that, which also, of course, relates to things like the past and, historical time and many other questions. But there is also something else, something quite specifically cinematic about death that we encounter. For me, actually, I think and this was one of the very first things that I really took away, was the opening shot of Vastutumba Swaha, which is, again, for those who don't know, that sequence really needs to be talked about, because it was a young artist and a friend of yours. I didn't know him in a lifetime, Girish Dahiwale, who immerses the Ganesha, and you, of course, take this with 35mm celluloid inside that water. And there is that extraordinary moment when he actually picks the water and he does a kind of a field thing of it. Dahiwale would not only immerse Ganesha, but would actually commit suicide very shortly, which means that you had a shot and no film. You had a shot and you wondered, now what is to be done, because your protagonist not only had immersed Ganesha, but had committed suicide himself. Years later, I was thinking about the whatever 90-minute circular trolley of Rati Chakravyuh, and I was saying to myself that this would be the kind of shot that a filmmaker like Yancho would have said, you're crazy, don't even try it, because cinema can't handle it. The problem with that is that when duration in cinema goes beyond a certain point, it becomes like, like closed circuit TV or something. It becomes a dead shot, So how do you keep giving it life? How does that dead air of celluloid to be given life after 10 minutes or after X amount of time would be a question that you would face. But I thought that the person who really faces it to the extent that I can imagine him just caked with sweat would have been Basab behind the camera. Because after 70 minutes, if someone makes a mistake, then that's the end of his shot. And you wonder whether he is going to literally survive this. So I wanted to really ask you this question around duration, the theory of duration, and of course, what is your signature idiom in cinema? It comes, of course, in the very beginning in etc., and then it's there through the long take. The long take is controversial. The long take is an issue. It was, of course, you remember in the case of the new Indian cinema, when you had, I don't know, Kundan Shah, and you had Saeed Mirza, and you had Ghashiram Kotwal, everybody would actually do one long take as a demonstration of cinematic virtuosity. You did that, because that was what separated the men from the boys, the ability to do the long take. And of course, the great masters of cinema that we were watching had the long take then. Then, of course, technology changes, the long take means something else. In the light of this particular question of the past, as you have talked about it, what would you see as the question of duration and the long take, especially in relation to the repeated reference to death and life that you make and also made in the films?
I think that's a complex question. Let me try. I'm not sure if I'll be doing justice. So for me, what happened, I can tell you again, the way to respond to this question will be kind of give you biographical examples. So what happened with etc. And the four shots of etc. and then subsequently, so etc. The idea was that is to think through time in 116mm can. That was something I was very aware and very sure when I was shooting the second part of etc., which is Soliloquy, where you have Dodo Bhujwala walking naked in the landscape. That was the first film I ever made, and by this time, and I'm not sure how I arrived to that particular moment, but I wanted to make a film without an edit. More than a single shot, my idea was that I want to make without an edit. And that's how I said, okay, let's have a film with this man, a man walking. And the man walking was the idea of fundamentally dealing with a certain idea of real time. This is, which it's probably with CCTV and digital television, digital images, it's redundant because constantly the moment we come out from our house in a city like Bombay and we go back home, we're already being captured by millions and hundreds and thousands of CCTV. And so, and the real time of CCTV, right? But during those years, where in order to make a 10-minute moving image, it would cost, I remember when I made Soliloquy, it was about 40,000 rupees or 30,000 rupees, buying the can, hiring the camera, then going back to Bombay to process it, then print it, then hiring the projection to watch it. So it was such an expensive process for somebody like me, without any capital in that sense. That for me, then it became very. At that time, it was about not so much of duration; it was about experiencing a real moment, or let's say. It was an ontological exercise, right? I wanted to experience time ontologically or recreate temporality ontologically, if that would be right. And once I saw that first film I made, when I saw it for the first time, and this was in Ad Labs in Andheri, in their projection room, I was quite shocked with what I had done. And I think I got hooked to the idea of this one take without edit narratives. And subsequently, I shot 7 of them. So from 1995 to 1997, I shot 7 16mm one takes, out of which one of them is Girish Daiwala's footage. That was eventually would have been a one take, but once I shot it, I didn't like it, so I decided to keep it aside and figure out what to do later. The other one take that did not end up in etc. is the shot of walking, the camera walking in Fashion Street on Churchgate, which is interspersed with dance with Kathakali. So that's the thing. And the third one is this sequence of the Bali that you see in Otikota. So all those things did not work, but I was very obsessed with the idea of real time. I think like in a certain sense, an ontological time, which then reaches once the digital cinema emerged, and we're talking about Red One camera came to India in 2009, and I shot Kathopanishad the winter of 2009. And I remember it was and I was very excited by this proposition of making a film well, it is one element of the film, the conversation between Nachiketa and Yam as a one-take thing. And so, you know, Kathopanishad is a three-shot film where the center is this 59 or 60-minute one-take. And once I found myself again, you know, hooked by this real possibility of time, that I decided to do the epic long take, which is what you see in Rati Chakra View. And you're rightly, you know, that film had too many moving parts to work in sync to become a successful film, which I think it is. It's quite, I think of it as quite a flawless film. But it's almost a miracle that it is a flawless film, because it is not only those 13 actors sitting in the circle, not even missing one line, because we were rehearsing for more than 6 weeks. It was Bashog's stunning camera work. His more than, you know, stunning, it requires an extra amount of physical dexterity to pull that. And then one of Bashog's junior, Manosh Bhattacharya, who was doing the focus, who was pulling the focus. That was like a very, very difficult thing to do, to pull the focus for nearly 1 hour, 42 minutes. And then, you know, one of the most important in that shot to be successful are the 2 or 3 workers who were pushing the cart on the dolly. And so that film eventually happened in 3 takes. The first I only had money to shoot for 2 days. And it was a very, very expensive shoot. We were about 43 people on the day of the shoot, because there was lights and generators and technicians and costume people and the makeup guys. It was quite a huge. I have never shot anything after that that was such a huge 43 people in one day. The only reason I remember there 43 people, we had to order 43 lunch boxes. And you know, so it was a collaborative process of a kind. So as I said, it was 2 days. So the first day, the shot that you see is the third shot, which is the first shot on the second day. And it was completely flawless. I was so happy with it, I decided that we don't need to shoot anymore. Although we did try shooting, and the fourth shot, but we gave up. And I think it just, as I said, it was too many moving parts for it to become a suck. I think, and you're right about what Yancho was saying. It was madness. To shoot a sequence like that, but I just wanted, you know, it was some kind of an obsession in a certain sense. After that, I haven't really worked on the long takes anymore. It was like, for me, the epitome, like 1 hour 42 minutes is quite a. I had proven myself that this was possible. And you're right. Yeah. You know, the person that I constantly think of is Yancho's Red Song. For me, that is actually one of the most important films of my life. Yancho's Red Song is like, I mean, that's an exemplary part. I mean, I think that film goes beyond what Godard is trying to do in Weekend, the long shot of Weekend, or what Tarkovsky is doing. But in 1970 or 71, when this film is made, it is quite a mind-blowing piece of work.
But there are other, there are other filmmakers that one can think of. In fact, it's really interesting, and I want to spend a little more time. I don't know what kind of time we've got, but at some point somebody will tell us, I presume, that we've spoken for too long. You can just go on. Sorry?
We have about 8-9 minutes.
Okay, 8-9 minutes. Okay, so in 8 minutes, I want to continue this idea of floating in dead air so that the air can live. And the idea of a shot being a kind of dead air that has to be given life. Actually, remember, this is kind of funny because, the tilt down that you have in the opening shot of etc., then you start seeing what eventually the rickshaw puller. Here's the funny thing. I started by looking at the shot on top, and as it came down, I thought that it was being, of course, shot by a gentleman in an old colonial hand rickshaw, Charulata and all that. And then the man puts down the rickshaw, and then the gentleman with the camera steps out. And then, of course, the gentleman is no longer a gentleman. He's now following this man. And as he goes in and further, I don't know who you can think of as the filmmaker that occurred to me. Okay, cut off the suspense because you only have 8 minutes. Chime in, Liang. That is the kind of filmmaker who would have made a transition from one cinematic state to another cinematic state inside a shot, and almost kind of moving ideologically from one condition to another. And of course, then you go further and further, and then he goes into the water, thereby anticipating Vakratunda Swaha, really. So many years and decades ago. There have been other filmmakers that have been mentioned, if I'm not mistaken. The film with the three women and the Beckett story I realized there's been reference to Antonioni in that particular context, and of course your cinematic legacy is something of a question here. I mean, where does one locate you as a filmmaker in this particular sort of firmament? Not least because you invite comparison. There is a way in which you seem to kind of suggest that, there could be this link. So what's your own cinematic legacy? What's the tradition of cinema that you would want to?
I mean, this is, it's the standard guys, right? Tarkovsky, Parajanov, Godard, Yancho. I would name these four within the international world, then Mani and Kumar. And I think within the Indian context, Kalo Bhiroti, the film by Amitabh Chakraborty, Om Darbadar by Kamal Saroop. These are the few films that I think in my head, I'm trying to have a conversation with these films and these filmmakers. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it is legacy would be the right way, but I think I'm having I'm trying to have dialogues with these filmmakers. More than these filmmakers, I think I'm creating cinematic works which are trying to have a dialogue with cinematic works. So one, for example, that I very consciously, I think Apotkalin Trikalika, the film that you have seen, I think of it as a conversation with Kalo Bhiroti of Amitabh Chakraborty, for instance. That's how I was thinking in my head when I was making a film. Let's say a film like Rati Chakravyuh, as I said, I think of it as a conversation with Red Song. And then let's say a film like Kalighat Fetish or even Vakratund Swaha, I think of it as having a conversation with Parajanov's. So I was thinking, that's how I think, but more than a legacy, as I said, it's trying to kind of construct a dialogical framework with these films more than the filmmakers. Mm-hmm. Well, let's say Nirakar Chaya, for instance, I think of Megidha Kathara, for instance.
Very much so, actually. Very much so. It's also interesting, and I think this is also something that brings the kind of work that Mort and Tara are doing at Chatterjee and Lal, and more the fact that filmmakers are actually showing much more in art museums and art galleries than they show in movie theaters, and they might actually show much more in biennales than in a film festival, for example. A certain number of, you are amongst the filmmakers whom Amrit Gangar, the aforementioned Amrit Gangar, names as part of the Prayoga group, the Prayoga group of filmmakers. Others in that group, I'm thinking of somebody like Kabir Mohanty, for example, who is also much more in an art space, although he too will see himself as very much of a filmmaker. Have moved there, but Datta, for example, has stayed within the cinema. Is there a kind of a sort of a fault line that arises where even being a filmmaker with mention of Yancho and all the other names that you mentioned as against a video artist, for example, you are nevertheless showing in those spaces rather than in classical film spaces. What has this done to your filmmaking?
The way I still think of myself as a filmmaker more than a video artist. The only reason I think, and this is a question about censorship in this country, the question of distribution mafia in this country, I think this is something very important, is that both and you know that, you have been closely involved with the Indian parallel filmmakers, is that with the parallel cinema, in a certain sense, the production crisis was solved by the state supporting. But the reason the parallel cinema fails is because it did not have adequate distributive network. And this is something you have written about, Madhav Prasad has written about, Moin Agda has written about, a lot of people have spoken about and written about, is that failure of parallel cinema had a lot to do with the state not producing a distributive mechanism. By the late 90s, with the liberalization, the state gives up the production framework also, right? Like NFDC and other things, they just totally fall apart. Distribution was never there. What happens then with filmmakers like us is that we don't have, I mean, when I started making a film like etc., I never had a distributive idea in mind. I just, the only thing I knew that the only way I could show this film would be in some few film festivals. And most of them did not accept that film, for instance. But that was how. Then the early 2000s, the rise of Indian art in the early 2000s is a very important moment, with galleries emerging and a new space emerging for artists. And then I think something here very important, it's a technological moment, is that video projectors by about 2005, 2007 became cheaper for people to buy, right? And that led to the rise of video artists showing their work in galleries, because you could do that. And I think I kind of moved, I would say not moved in through, again, accidental means. I met through certain connections. I met Mott and Tara at Chatterjee and Lal, and they were very open to showing my works in the gallery, and that's how I ended up in gallery spaces. The other problem with my work has been the censor certificate, right? That, I had two experiences, of one with Nirakar Chaya, where they decided that they want a cut in the film when the chicken is being slaughtered, which I refused. And then I had gone to censor certificate to get Kathopanishad, and there some completely absurd thing happened, is that they gave me a certificate, but they gave me a certificate which is called O certificate, which basically, I don't know what it meant. It's like other cinema, like so put it, it's like the state also considers me outside in the certificate form. So I had other cinema, and when I asked them what it meant, they said, Kathopanishad is not really a film. There are just 2 actors and 3 shots. You can't make a film like that. So we will give you other cinema. You can show, but again, the problem with other cinema is that the distributors were not interested. So, and that was the end of it. After that, this was 2010, and after that, I've never been to the censor board. And then the only way I could show my films were in these gallery spaces, which were private screening spaces. So they were not public, they were not ticketed, they were private. And what I think Maud and Tara have done was to create, frankly speaking, a refuge for a kind of a refuge for a filmmaker like me. And I think that is how I ended up in gallery spaces. And I'm fine with it right now. I'm not looking to make films. So MUBI, then, I think this screening at this retrospective MUBI is very radical, because one can, my films can be there in an OTT platform, and it kind of moves outside the distributive hegemony or the distributive mafia that controls Indian cinematic sphere, and also escapes the censorial, the censoring state. And so, and therefore, for the first time, frankly speaking, that my films are being shown in a public sphere rather than a private sphere of a gallery. So that's the first part of your question. The second part about Prayog and what Amrit talks about, I find, again, it's a very interesting moment, because I actually find the word Prayog also like a refuge. It's an epistemic refuge for me. I mean, if you remember, you were there at the conference at Chicago, right? Adur Gopalakrishnan was there that evening. And I remember, talking about then also with you and others, is that for me, the Prayog is a very epistemically safe space. ideologically and philosophically, historically, then to be termed experimental or avant-garde, both of which I think are, they create an epistemic violence by categorizing, and therefore what happens when I'm told that I'm an experimental filmmaker or avant-garde is that I'm force-fitted into an already given silo where I'm not comfortable. And I think Prayog has a kind of liberating feel for me. Anyway, so I'm getting a text from RJ from MUBI that we should wrap up. So.
All right. Well, to be continued then other fora and other conversations, and of course other contexts.
Okay.
Great. It was wonderful. So thank you very much for making this happen, and thanks to all those concerned for inviting me and making this conversation take place.
Thank you, Ashish, for having the conversation. Thank you, Chatterjee and Lal, for making this possible. This has been a great conversation. And you and me, Ashish, we will continue this conversation at the moment. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Bye.
Okay.
Stop it.